I was going to school at UCLA, waiting tables at a restaurant called Trump's on the corner of Robertson and Melrose. It's not there anymore. I think it's Morton's now. But Nancy came in with some friends for dinner, and that was the first time that I had met her. And I also happened to be their waiter, and we got to talking, and we met for a drink afterwards, and then it just, the relationships and the friendships grew from there. She was very, very connected in the community, in the gay community in Los Angeles, and they were a little bit older than I was, and so they kind of took me under their wing, and I sort of became a part of their flock. Nancy was she was very shy and timid personality-wise, but her look was very unique. She had buzzed hair, which she would bleach. They used to call her Q-tip. And she always had some amazing Norma Kamali or Yohji Yamamoto outfit on. Whenever she showed up anywhere, you would gravitate towards her. And we started talking about wanting to have a family. And what would that look like? I was an out gay man. I genuinely fell in love with her, and she genuinely fell in love with me. But, how was the dynamic of that going to work in a long-term relationship raising a child? We just decided to do it. And we got married. We got married in Tokyo. And when we got home, we set about the business of conceiving a child. And that was right after the formation of APLA. That group of friends were the ones who initially came down with AIDS, and the early days would pass away within days. So this group of people, they saw this happening, and nobody knew what to do. Everybody wanted to help, but nobody knew what to do. And so several people got together and decided that we needed to come together as a community and help these people and do what we could for them, whether it was to bring them food or whether it was to drive them to the hospital or whether it was to visit them in the hospital, because it all happened so fast. People would get, we thought, a cold, on Friday, and on Monday we would hear that they had passed away. They didn't even know how to treat people. They were getting pneumocystis pneumonia, and they didn't even know how to treat them because it just happened so fast. They knew so little about HIV then that they didn't even have an HIV test. And we didn't know if we were HIV positive or not. And the doctor told us that we could probably have a child, and that it wasn't something that would pass from the womb into the unborn child. Then there was the first pediatrics AIDS convention in New York, and that was probably in 1984. And he called us actually from New York, Joel Weissman. He called us from New York, and he said, "You guys can't get pregnant." He said, we're just finding out statistics and data about the virus passing from the mother, if she's positive, to the unborn child. So you guys should adopt. The really only test that they had to find out where you were in your progression with HIV was the T-cell test. They would check your T-cells. And if your T-cells were above a certain level, you couldn't get the opportunistic infections. So at the time that Nancy found out that she was positive, she was not in that range. And they also, at that time, could not tell how many people that got infected would actually progress to full-blown AIDS. Well, Nancy was a very positive person and a very positive thinking person. And you take that little bit of information that not everybody who tests positive for HIV will progress to full-blown AIDS. Of course, now, hardly anybody does. But in those days, they didn't have the drug therapy that they had. So we took it as, okay, now we have this information, and we have to do everything within our power to stay healthy, to not allow this thing to progress any further. And we started looking into alternative ways of staying healthy, whether it was acupuncture and herbs and those kinds of things. Shortly after Nancy was diagnosed as HIV positive, they came out with AZT. And Joel Weissman, because of his position with UCLA, he was a private doctor, but he had an affiliation. He was able to get Nancy into the study, but you didn't know if you had a placebo or you had the medication. So she started taking AZT, and I think that probably extended things a little bit. Nancy's relationships at that point in time, sexual relationships, were with gay men. And she probably contracted it from somebody she was having. I know for a fact she contracted it from somebody she was having a relationship with because he predeceased her. It was tough. We ended up taking care of him as much as we could, as much as he would allow at the time. But that was the direct. There may have been others, but that was somebody that was intimately involved with her for probably a year before he became ill and then passed away. She was diagnosed with pneumocystis pneumonia and went immediately to the hospital. And they started treating her with all of the drugs they were using. Again, it was still all experimental at the time, and they weren't working. On some level, we thought she would just have to take the medications again and she would recover. But at that point in time, she was her immune system was too far gone. And it was probably about 2 days before she actually passed away, they put her on a respirator. And we had made this promise. I promised her I would never let them put her on life support. But doctor said, you got to give it a shot. So I convinced her to go on it, and much against her will. So she was in ICU, and I was in there with her one day, and they have to keep you sedated so that you don't fight the equipment. But as the sedation would start to wear off, you would become a little bit aware of what was going on, and you could almost communicate. I could understand what she was trying to communicate to me, and they restrain you, so you can't point or anything. So I just started talking to her, and I said, how are you doing? And she shook her head, no. And I said, what do you want? You want to come off the respirator, don't you? And she shook her head, yes. So I called the doctor, and he said, I'm going to come at 4 o'clock as soon as I finish with my patients in the office. And so I came back in the room and told her. It was Jean Rogalski. I said, Jean's going to come at 4 o'clock. She said, no, now. So I called Jean back and said she wants off now. So they took her off the respirator. And I think the next morning, about 5 or 6 in the morning, she passed away. It was an amazing opportunity to spend the years that I had with her. She gave me so much. She gave me a child. She gave me love. She gave me a wedding. She gave me a marriage. She also gave me a lot of strength. Her spirit was strong. Her dedication to helping other people, to wanting to make a difference in other people's life. I learned a lot from that, and I think that there's a certain portion of that that's traveled on with me through the years, and I'm grateful, extremely grateful for that. I just assumed that I was going to be positive because Nancy was, because we did have a sexual relationship. And I was fortunate, for whatever reason. I tested positive in 1984, and that's a long time ago. So I'm a long-term non-progressor, and I was just one of the fortunate ones who managed to have an immune system that stayed strong enough until there were medications and antiretrovirals that were much more successful than the early ones. All that we did and all that we've done for people with HIV and AIDS over the years needs to translate into things that are happening in the world today. Take, for instance, this, the pandemic that we're dealing with right now. I feel very sad that our country is so divided, and if people could just slow down and look at the loss that people are experiencing, whether it's their businesses or family members or their jobs, and try to reach out and help them instead of pointing fingers. And I feel like that's what we tried to do. There was no way of normalizing it, but you could help and support the people that were affected.